Good evening, everyone who is watching or will be watching later. Thank you so much for joining us for episode number 8 of UXR Conversations. I'm pretty proud of that. Made it to number 8. If you don't know me, I am Noam Siegel, Director of User Research at Wealthfront. And I am very excited about today's guest. We have with us Michele Ronsen, founder at Curiosity Tank, among other things. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I wrote some stuff here. So, I mean, you have this kind of rich, incredible professional history, and you've been doing research and design consulting for a bunch of Fortune 500 companies, big names. But today we're here for another reason. We're here because both of us, I feel, to a great extent, we're very dedicated to research education, research coaching, research mentorship, and I really wanted to focus on that. You tell me, but I think that as part of that, that side of you, you founded Curiosity Tank. And you've been teaching design, user research for several years now in the Bay Area and beyond. You now offer your own classes, you've built curriculums, you're teaching tools, and you're doing that for two places I've spent some time in, academia and industry settings. Super interesting. How do you, when people ask you kind of what do you do or how you define yourself these days, what do you say? What's kind of your professional identity these days?
That's a good question. I think it depends who I'm talking to. If it's someone within the UX or the design space, my initial response would be I'm a design researcher and educator, would be sort of like the condensed version. And if they ask more or want to dig deeper, I'm thrilled to go into both, my consulting practice and my teaching practice. And then lately my B2C endeavors, which are selling classes directly, which has been a hugely entrepreneurial and, eyes wide open kind of experience. I can tell you I'm much more comfortable in the consulting space than the B2C space. And we can talk about that more later.
No, but why is that? Since you bring it up, what's the big difference for you?
I think the difference is I'm used to selling, $10, $20, $40, $60, $80,000 research projects. I know the value of that and I know how to price something like that. And I've been doing that for years. But when it comes to selling something to an individual for, say, $300 or $500, it's very emotional. And I wind up spending almost, as much time, if not more, in some instances, it's more time consuming. It's just a different type of offering. And the person on the receiving end and who I am, it changes the dynamic. It's just like this incredible dynamic complexity. But I'm thrilled to say that now that my corporate clients are asking more and more to adopt my teachings for the corporate environments. And that seems to be a win-win for everyone and kind of a much easier kind of sell. But the need is there. The need was just all around me. That's how it came about. We can happy to get into that too.
So if anyone is with us live now or joining later, we love answering questions. You can send us your questions by simply commenting on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. I think YouTube is the best, and we'll gladly take questions while we chat here. I wanted to tell you a fun fact. The reason we're talking today, I have to give credit to a woman I give credit to for a lot of things. My wife. My wife suggested we speak.
Oh my gosh, she's your wife.
Genius move. Carmel Siegel. She's not in the research community, but she had heard of you. and she suggested your name. And when I kind of looked you up and revisited who you are, I noticed everything you're up to and how much we share. And so thank you, Carmel, for kind of introducing us and being the reason that you're on the show tonight. So I kind of feel like in order for us to talk about educating, coaching, mentoring, we have to start with, or we have to agree on what this thing that we do is. What is design? What is research? What are we trying to educate about? How do you view our field right now, both design and research? Where are you trying to get people to with these courses and all of the other mentorship you do?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. I think that user research today is where UX design was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was new, it was exciting, everybody wanted to do it, everybody wanted to be it, everybody wanted to get me some of that. And what I realized when I started to teach at General Assembly in January 2019, was that it was the first time I had taught in a non-matriculated environment ever. I had always taught in formal academic institutions. And by teaching 3-hour workshops or day-long, what they call boot camps, outside of their certificate program, I do not teach in a certificate program. I only teach standalone classes. The amount of people that were interested in user research and design research and the variety of backgrounds that they were coming from, week after week after week, I was like, wow, like people are really interested in this and there's not a place to go. I had, designers, customer service people, dental hygienists, insurance, evaluators,
Wow.
you name it. I mean, every single walk of life, week after week after week. And then I just started to kind of do my own little research and ask, like, well, why are you here? What's one thing that would make this workshop successful for you? Or what's one thing that would make this class, worth your time? And what do you hope to get out of it? And then I started to formalize that through sentence completion, and then use that as an example of a way to gather information. And then I formalized that and I created kind of like an entry survey, which had different question formats. And then I could talk to like survey design and open-ended answers and analysis. And then I sort of formalized that. And then I added another class, and then I added another class. And I went to General Assembly, and who I love. I have a terrific relationship with the San Francisco office. And I just said, I love you, you love me. Like, there's a gap here. People want to learn this stuff, and there's not a lot of places to go. There's no places to go if you're a non-matriculated student in Northern California. And I would love to build out a design and user research certificate program for you. And they, said, sorry, we love you. You can build as many classes as you want and we will support you, but they do not want anything to compete with their design certificate program. So I was like, and I kind of scratched my head. It really wasn't the answer I was expecting. So I started to add more classes. And the next class I added was called Mixed Methods. And the students go through 7 methods in one day. And I needed a unifying problem or challenge to work towards. And really, without giving it too much thought, but kind of, the challenge I came up with was, how do we upskill what I refer to these temporary, accidental, or aspiring user researchers? Like, what is the best learning path? How do you want to learn? What's missing from what is available today? And I ran this class 7 times, 6 times, 7 times, about 75 students through it who were all part of this target audience. And we came up with, there were definitely themes in the frameworks and how the teams, arrived at their ideal, kind of learning experience. And from that, I took the best of the best in what was viable and created Curiosity Tank. And then launched the Curiosity Tank with those formats in that structure, just began to prototype. in live atmosphere based on all of that, 15 months of kind of research I had done before.
Is Curiosity Tank kind of a manifestation of what you believe to be the ideal way to learn this craft and get into the profession of being a researcher?
I really feel that to be a successful researcher, you need a lot of hands-on experience and you need some mentoring and guidance along the way. It's kind of akin to learning a new language. You got to get out there and you have to practice it. Playing a musical instrument is another analogy I've heard. You've got to get out there and practice it. And you can read theory all you want. You can read case studies. You can read research plans. But until you get out there in a live environment, I think there's a tremendous amount of improv that happens as a researcher. And I love that aspect. I love being live like this and being live with, an interviewee. But until you get out there and do it over and over and over again and see like the variety of ways it can go sideways or ways it can blossom.
Yeah.
You're really, I think the ideal is to create a series of apprenticeships. Like you're a dad. Are you familiar with Doc McStuffins, the toy hospital?
I am not. Should I
Oh,
be?
you
What is
gotta
that?
look it up. So Doc McStuffins is a great TV show. It's brilliant. And Doc McStuffins is like a kid doctor of a toy hospital. And the patients come in and they're all stuffies and they're all different types of toys, but some of them lose a leg and some of them lose an eye, or some of them have pretty serious things like they're losing their hair because they have cancer. But Doc McStuffins like runs this toy hospital where she like takes on these apprentices and kind of shepherds people through in like the nicest, kindest way. And I'm actually going to be prototyping an apprenticeship model in 2 weeks. So I feel like the Curiosity Tank classes that show, practice kind of model, everybody leaves with like that thing. You're working on your own project, or I'll help you assign, I'll assign you one. I have 100 projects I'd love for people to work on. That is a really, really key ingredient to success in this space. I mean, bar that, if I had a magic wand, I mean, I would develop a school and, we would have an apprenticeship model where you would, be able to be an apprentice, for 12 or 18 months and get to see multiple phases of research evolve over time and product development, go from idea to execution to V2 to V3. But our society just doesn't support that. We just don't really have bandwidth to do that. I certainly don't have the bandwidth to take that on.
How does the apprenticeship model differ from, say, the internship model, which already exists? Can you kind of clarify what your vision is for that and how it differs from me as a student, or later on getting a couple of internships at, brand name, well-known companies and learning research through that?
Yeah, I think one thing that's unusual and both beautiful about our industry is that so many people are coming into it or want to break into it after they've had another career. And internships aren't available to those people. Internships, for the most part,
Yep.
are available to undergrads
Yep.
that are still in school. So that eliminates, a wide variety, at least, of my students. Another is that it's expensive to live today. It's far more expensive than it was in our parents' generation or generation before that. And I don't think internships pay too well. And many internships offer credit, in exchange. So what I'm going to prototype next week, we have 4 apprentices, as we've called them, and they're each being offered a stipend. So it's a $3,000 stipend that will, come out of a project budget. So they're definitely being compensated for their work. It'll be about a month-long project. We estimate it'll take them about 40 to 50 hours. None of them are in school, so they wouldn't have qualified for an internship, if you will. That's one of the
Incredible.
differences. Yeah.
Incredible. And what's the nature of these projects? How does that work? What
So this one is kind of perfect because it's benchmarking a series of healthcare provider tools. So they don't really need direct client interaction. The work can be scoped pretty well in advance. I've spent a good time brainstorming with a colleague of mine who shall remain nameless because he's still employed, on on how we might frame this in a way that our apprentice. We went back and forth on this. Is it apprentices or prenti or we need like a word for it.
I would suggest apprentices, but
Apprentices. Okay. So how we could structure it for them, provide them with enough structure, that they can run with, as well as office hours so that we're available and check-ins. But we're going to have 2 teams of 2. Each of them is going to benchmark 7 competitors of this particular tool. We're going to identify like 10 of the criteria for them to evaluate, and then they should come back and also, recommend 5 more that they think would be relevant. So give them enough kind of structure to put the guardrails on, if you will, but also allow them the freedom to explore and shape it themselves.
yeah. Are you taking from the kind of the playbook of these new schools like Lambda School that started up, which offers these kind of boot camps for UX, among other things, and also data science engineering? Who's kind of your mentor, or how are you learning how to even build all this, or is this all just your kind of brainchild coming out of into Curiosity Tank? Do you have any inspirations yourself or models that you're emulating in any way for this type of thing?
That's a good question. I can't say that this is all my brainchild. I mean, I've been studying people in this space for over a year. I mean, there was such a gap. The gap became so apparent to me when I started, again, teaching at General Assembly, where I was in an unmatriculated environment. I think boot camps gets such a bad rap, and there's a good part of me that absolutely understands that if you sign up, to participate in a boot camp, I think you have an expectation that you're going to have a certain skill set that you'll be able to do 1, 2, 3 and get a job. I think that there's a shared responsibility there, certainly the Lambda schools too. I think that there's a shared responsibility there. Certainly if you want to study research, to do your research before you enroll. I like to say, people come to me all the time, should I do a UX boot camp at da-da-da-da? Should I go to a boot camp at da-da-da-da? And my feedback in all instances is, have you spoken to at least 3 to 5 recent graduates of the last cohort?
Yeah.
Right? Have you spoken to at least 2 to 3 of the instructors that will be teaching your class? And have you asked them how much on the ground hands-on experience they have in their field? And have you talked to the people at the front desk where you're going to school? Like, until you do those 3 things, like, it's all on you. You know what I mean? I feel companies market all the time, right? That's their business. But if you really want to make an informed decision, you've got to do a little bit of research. And if you're looking to get into research, you have to take a little ownership. Take some steps there too. Now, is there false information out there? Do I agree with the false information? I think it's horrible. Do I know for a fact that it really is false? No, I don't. Do I know for a fact that I've had an absolutely stellar relationship with General Assembly in San Francisco, and do I love them to death? Absolutely. But I'm also the first person to say, I don't teach in a boot camp and I don't teach in a certificate program. And I certainly don't guarantee that anybody coming out of any one of my classes is going to be, job ready after a day or after a series of 4 classes. It's not how it works. It's not how it works. And if you have that idea or you have that impression, then something else went awry somewhere else. but I can get you closer, and I can answer a lot of questions, and I'll certainly be a cheerleader and a resource, to you and for you for life. But nothing's going to happen overnight, and nothing's going to happen in 2 weeks, and nothing's going to happen in 2 months. It doesn't work like that.
When you talk about getting both people closer and also organizations closer, and you talk about the gap,
Yeah.
can you articulate what exactly that gap is, both for individuals and also organizations, which, as you mentioned, you identified? By the way, I'm not going to lie, I forgot to turn on one of the lights in this room. So while you answer that, I'm just going to do that.
No
Pretend
problem.
this didn't happen. This is what happens with live
I love it.
broadcasts, So I'm just going to do that for a second.
Sure. So the biggest gap that I see in corporations is, and I'm very lucky that the majority of my clients are very UX mature, so they have established research practices and respectful research practices. So the big ask there, the big challenge there is, how do we enable and support our broader teams, our quote unquote non-formal researchers, to feel more confident in gathering their own data and asking their own questions with confidence. So how do we, the term democratize research, you talked to Bezat a couple of shows ago. How do we inspire people and encourage people to do that, provide them with like the guardrails and the support and the safety net to make sure that it doesn't become reckless. And on the other hand, to make sure that we're also capturing the learnings, and the learnings are, getting fed back into the system, and that as we educate more people to ask their own questions with greater confidence, that the knowledge that's being gleaned, is getting returned to the system, right? It's got to be fed back to the mothership. It's got to be tracked somehow, so that collectively we can all grow. So that's what I'm seeing on the corporate side.
By the way, I have to ask you, sorry for cutting you off here, but this week was a dramatic week for the notion or the concept of democratizing research. I don't know if you noticed this, but Eduardo Gomez Ruiz wrote a Medium article called Scaling UX Research, How to Train an Army of Non-Researchers. And then yesterday, Saswati Saha Mitra wrote a Medium article called Undemocratizing User Research, where she shared some of the issues and the potential pitfalls with this notion of democratizing research. So it's been an exciting week. 2 incredible articles. I highly recommend them to anyone who's watching. They're both on Medium. And I'm following closely. And indeed, I had my own conversation with Bezod. So what's your thinking on, just quickly, on some of the pitfalls and the opportunities of democratizing research? There are pitfalls as well, potentially.
Absolutely.
You started touching upon that.
Yeah. I think it's really delicate, and I think it's culturally specific, right? So what's going to work at Slack is not necessarily what's going to work at Zillow, is not necessarily what's going to work at Verizon, right? I think a lot of it is cultural. I think a lot of it is leadership. I think a lot of it is confidence. And I think a lot of it is, how high are those guardrails, and where are those guardrails? So, for example, I was in conversation today going over one of the trainings and the courses that I'm converting for Slack. We say Slackifying it. And I was speaking with one of the researchers who works with primarily Slack admins and the corporate clients. And we were going over the section on, why do you incent, participants, and what is an incentive, and how do you, what might we offer? And, we just had this, really candid conversation about how that's very different for a corporate client, and A, we can't do that, and B, this is what they want to get out of it. And I think that that's another, culturally relevant situation, is who are your clients, and is there sensitive data? A lot of things what we want to do maybe is, ask people to share stuff with us. Well,
yeah,
depending upon what you're looking at, if you're talking to, even a realtor, on Premier Agent at Zillow, a lot of that stuff's going to be sensitive. So we have different considerations. And I don't think that there's like any silver bullet. I don't think that there's any one size that fits all. It's more, and then the other huge variable is what's their tech stack, right? So are they using Validately, or are they using user testing? Are they using user interviews, or are they using user Zoom, right? So, and then how tall do you have to be to like ride this ride? Is there some sort of gateway where someone, writes a request to the research team, and then the research team says yay or nay, this is an appropriate research study, and we don't have information on it, so go down this track and that's the DIY track, or go down this track and that's the research track, or go down this track and that's the full-on support track. So what's the process look like? So I think those are all variables to take into consideration.
I loved the roller coaster analogy you made there with the how tall do you have to be to ride. I'll remember that one. I feel like I cut you off before you're going to talk about individuals rather than organizations. Is that correct? Do you want to mention anything about that side of the story?
The individuals are just fascinating. I mean, again, I mentioned they're coming from all walks of life. I have school superintendents, I have museum curators, I have dental hygienists, I have academic researchers, designers, project managers, customer support people. There's really no kind of huge, a third of the population is UX related, people who take my classes. The other 2/3 are not. I mean, they're really coming from different walks of life. And what I think is so beautiful, and what I think is so just delicious about it, is the richness that they bring, and their ahas as they go through some of these classes. Like, oh, this is just like when I do this, or this reminds me of that, but we call it something different. Right. There's also more and more people coming from the marketing side too. I think they're looking to just kind of bridge the gap. Like, what is user research? Like, why is that any different from market research? Like, what are the similarities? What are the gaps? And is it a language thing? And just the dynamics of the conversations in the classroom are just, they're wonderful too.
Seeing this diverse group of people, and from all walks of life, to your point, has it changed your philosophy at all about who belongs in this profession? I think about this a lot, about this question of who belongs as a researcher. A lot of people feel like they are imposters to this profession. I spoke to someone yesterday, a new mentee of mine, who basically said something like, although I studied economics, I want to be a UX researcher. And I kind of told her, I'm not sure why you used the word although there. It feels to me as if you belong in the profession just as much as a psychologist would, or anthropologist, or any other profession, essentially. What's your take currently, especially experiencing this demand from so many people across so many domains on who belongs in our profession?
That's so interesting. I've never really paused to think about that. I guess from the other aspect, I have this one slide in this class I teach, how to conduct the art of conducting user research interviews. And there's one slide about all the attributes that a great researcher has, like, in that moment. And I always counter it, like, these aren't attributes that I think you should aspire to have like 7 days a week. This is like when you're on stage, on camera, like in leading a discussion. And so that was the first thing I thought of was, demonstrate your authentic curiosity, right? So I think for most people, it's more of like a calling than a belonging. And I'm not very religious, but I would imagine there's something, kind of akin to like a cult there, right? Like, you never want to belong to or maybe you do, right? Because maybe it's so, I don't know, interesting or heady. But I would say, I think more of it in terms of characteristics that are similar across all the great researchers that I know. And one of them is just an insatiable curiosity, a passion for learning, and the ability to listen. And then I think would kind of be like the baseline. And then as you get more and more strategic and kind of become a better practitioner over time, the ability to really organize and herd a whole lot of cats, and to make the call on the spot, about whether or not this person is appropriate, or whether they might have gotten through the screener another way, or in different ways to organize your note-taking strategies and get stakeholders involved at every single step of the way. And then a variety of ways to engage through analysis and synthesis and spot those patterns. And then probably as you get up and further up the ladder, it's learning to move from insights into action, and how to plant those seeds for action much sooner in the process.
Yeah.
Not sure I really answered your question, but
You did.
okay.
So we
How would you answer the
have.
question?
Sorry?
How would you answer that question? Who belongs in your point of view?
Around belonging?
Mm-hmm.
So again, when I think of, so there's a lot of discussion around who the modern researcher may be, or what the skills necessary are, or what they will be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think the number one thing we'll need in the future is a very diverse perspective on human behavior and
Mm-hmm.
needs. I think that's the only way we can truly be empathetic to the people we're trying to serve. And for that reason alone, I feel like we need people from all sciences, social sciences, and otherwise. I'm I'm yet to. I mean, I've heard so many stories from researchers, so many pathways to what we do, and they've all been incredible colleagues to me, countless mentors, countless advisors. I appreciate all of them. I think I struggle to find good examples of people who don't potentially belong. I do agree with you, though, that there are certain foundations necessary to thrive in the role. And I imagine it's not a coincidence that you named your latest business Curiosity Tank, because curiosity really is a big part of the foundation of being
Yeah.
successful in research. And I know that if anything defines me, it's probably curiosity,
Right.
which is something I think I can thank my mother for passing that along to me. So that's my take right now. We
So funny story. Let me interrupt you there. So people used to say to me they still say to me all the time, why do you do what you do? I love it. Like I absolutely love, if I won the lottery, I would probably do, form a school. Like I truly love what I do. I'm very blessed. The first to say, I think I won the career lottery, but my response is because it fills my curiosity tank. I get to help people learn every single day, help them move their businesses forward, help them, identify and empathize with their clients or their targets. But it also fills my curiosity tank, and that's
great.
where the name came from. Yeah,
That's great. That's a great brand name choice and story behind the company. That's awesome. We have a couple of questions here that
okay.
maybe it would be nice to address. So Tiana, I think he's asked a question every single show, and now again, thank you for being engaged with us here. So the question is essentially around, I think, academia and industry and the relationship between them, how UX research fits in with what universities are up to, various business and engineering schools, increasing their collaboration with industry. What do you think might happen? I mean, this has been this has been a sore point for me, certainly coming out of a psych PhD program and really longing to collaborate more. And there isn't always much openness for that. There are a few large companies in the Bay Area that have kind of organized programs for collaboration. But when you think about everything we've talked about, apprenticeships, opportunities to experience, sorry, real world research, where does it all come together when it comes to the relationship between academia and industry?
Tiana, if I had the answer to that question, sister, I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I don't know if there's, first of all, I don't think there's one right answer. Second of all, I think that this is going to evolve over time. When I was getting my Bachelor of Fine Arts in graphic design, design wasn't nearly like the cool, sexy thing that it is today. Um, and it's, over the 20 years or so, since then, I mean, it's evolved tremendously, and it is part of every grandmother's lexicon, right? Your
Yeah.
grandmother is commenting on the shape of a mouse or a cup or a pen or whatever. And I don't think that research will get to, that point of popularity or frequency, but I think that as a culture, we are going to advance. In fact, I wrote about this actually on LinkedIn last week. I think that COVID-19, which, by the way, today is April 22nd, we're in the middle of our shelter in place here in California. I think that in many ways, COVID-19 and the experiences that we're going to embark on will improve our skills to be empathetic to others. I mean, think about this right now. Noam, you're sitting at home, I assume, in like a guest bedroom, right? You would
Yep.
never see this before. I'm actually at my parents' place right now. They're totally helping me with, my little and homeschooling her and while I work and everything like that. But we're seeing parts of people's lives that we've never experienced before, right? We're seeing newscasters in their home. And I think that this is going to unfold like a flower. And over, the next 5 years, I think it's going to look very differently. I think there's going to be formalized training in schools that offer certificate programs. I think the education is going to be much more successful. I think the divide or the challenge will still be in how to provide that education and get that hands-on experience. It's the marriage of the theory and the practice and the theory that is missing. And that's what I'm really striving to close that gap. But I hope that universities and industry will, find ways to collaborate and nurture and build the industry. But I think it's very hard also with the NDAs that we all have in place. I know it's very hard for me to even find opportunities that would be appropriate for an apprentice with the existing NDAs I have in place.
Yeah.
And even just having them sit in the room, right? It's not like we're working for an advertising agency, not to belittle advertising agencies, but there's a very different sensitivity to the subject matter that we're working on.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched upon a second question we got here from Sumit. Thank you, Sumit, around UX research in remote scenarios. How do I do research during this type of lockdown? I love how you touched upon this kind of at the more abstract level, kind of how will this isolation, this lockdown, this global pandemic potentially change our research practices forever?
Yeah.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts on that, or maybe a good remote research tip for those watching us?
I think there's going to be more pros and cons to it. I mean, certainly a lot more people are conducting research remotely than ever before. But I don't think that is a replacement to working side by side, with an interviewee. I hope that it won't take away or derail from, things like ethnographies and going out into the field. I do know a number of researchers who are sort of up in arms by the amount or the speed of the transition that everybody or many people are jumping on, like, oh, just go remote. Oh, just go remote. There's a time and a place for a remote, and I hope that we will remember that as a community, and the senior practitioners in the community and the mentors in the communities. We may have to work a little overtime to educate on that when the time comes and we can interact, with people in person. So I think that there's pros and cons to doing that. I don't think it changes the foundations, though, and the importance of learning the foundations. So you have to really, really understand, why are you doing the research? And you and your teammates and your stakeholders need to agree on why are you doing the research, what are you looking to learn, and how will these learnings be applied? The means in which you gather that, I think, is a separate topic, but nothing will ever replace that super solid foundation.
Yeah. We're at the time when I make some terrible dad joke about my producer being very strict about how long these interviews go and we have to finish. Of course, I'm the producer. So again, let's avoid the dad joke. But I have to ask two more things before we end.
And I have to find out how Carmel got to me.
I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you on that. So the first thing is, I think we talked a lot about kind of UX research project coaching, to kind of paraphrase you, actually. But I want to ask you about career coaching. It's not very easy, to say the least, to get into this profession. Would you mind sharing with the audience, both watching now and later, one of your favorite kind of tips or tidbits of information you share about how to build a thriving career as a UX researcher, how to get into this? Do you have any kind of go-to that you're willing to share with everyone?
I'm nothing prepared, but a few things, come to mind. And one, it doesn't matter what industry you are in. I think being a nice person really goes a long way. I really can't underestimate that. Being open and available. I had a couple people reach out to me or I reached out to a couple people on LinkedIn recently who commented or liked something I did. And they came back and said, thank you so much. We'd love to connect, but I don't like to connect with people I don't know. Are you open to a phone call? And I made time for every single one of those calls, and I have no time. I am like a time strap, locked down, working mom. I just said, you know what, if this is important to you and this is what you did and you're taking this stand, like, you're interesting. I want to talk to you. And I had another one of those calls yesterday. So, I'd say be nice. The opposite of that is don't be an asshole. But I think being nice goes a long way.
That's a good tip.
Another would be to ask for feedback along the way. I have always considered my clients a second group of my users. And I have my end users who I might be studying, but I have my primary users who are my client teams.
Yeah.
And I study them first, and I go through the process and I invest at the time to find out what is culturally significant to their organization and their question and their process. And I wonder to empower myself to fit that form. And that takes shape in many, many different ways, from how detailed a plan might be to the format in which, I'm soliciting feedback, to how the output is, delivered. And I ask, and then I would say number 3 is I ask for feedback along the way. I really do. I really feel like feedback is a gift. And if you're willing to take the time, I'm willing to learn from it. And being able to be agile and nimble has helped me be successful in moving in and out of a lot of organizations very quickly and getting up to speed very quickly. And most of my projects, continue, my engagements continue 6, 8, 12 months, a year or more.
Yeah.
I'd say those are my three.
I want to ask you one last thing.
Yeah.
One of, if not the most special moment in my career so far was when I gave a talk last year at UXR Conf in Toronto. And I want to thank the organizers again and everyone involved in that conference for just a marvelous experience. I highly recommend anyone watching attends this year. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be a remote conference. It's the best UX research conference out there, in my opinion. The talk I gave was about the lessons I've learned about research from my 4-year-old, now 5-year-old daughter. And
I love it.
And, your parents as well. And you have taught, educated, coached, mentored countless people.
Right.
But my final question for you is, what have you learned from your child about our practice, our field?
Oh, so much. I could write a book about that. Well, first of all, she's a little mini me, so she runs around asking why all the time.
Yeah.
Like, careful. Like, they really do mirror you. I think that, as adults, we have been trained to become desensitized to our emotions. And one of the most beautiful things, certainly, during this pandemic is watching her raw reactions or emotions to something that adults can't even grasp, right? So that, the ice cream stores can't be closed. I mean that's just that. Well, but everybody needs ice cream is essential, right? from her little brain, to and how she has tried to process, this. I'm not really answering your question. I think that I've learned that, we've become so desensitized and so kind of controlling of our emotions over time, or maybe it's a combination of, intellectual maturity, but her spontaneity and her raw emotions and inability to censor herself is so beautiful. And I learned so much from she had this class assignment a couple of weeks ago. I wrote about this on LinkedIn too. And her class assignment was to think about 3 things that she wishes were different in her lockdown experience. And she had to just come up with 3 words to describe these 3 things. Yeah. And then she was to take them and start a conversation with her parents about these 3 things and about why she wanted them to change and what that would mean to her. And it was like an activity in persuasive writing and conversation. And the 3 things that she chose, A, I had no idea were even bothering her. And B, 2 of them, like, I could fix in 5 minutes or less.
Yeah.
So I also learned through her education. I'm a firm believer. Everything, what's that quote? Everything you really need to know in life, you learn in kindergarten.
Well, if you go to kindergarten, which right now for my daughter is quite unclear, but let's hope she gets there. Let's hope it starts.
It's a great class. I recommend everybody take kindergarten again.
Michele Ronsen, founder of Curiosity Tank, thank you so much. I'm so grateful and happy that our paths crossed and that we got to talk today. You are absolutely a nice person, to your point. Thank you for being so kind to me and for sharing some of your thoughts with everyone. If anyone watching wants to get in touch with you, we added all of the details in the show notes. But do you want to mention anything about
Mm-hmm.
to get in touch with you, or what for, or any other information you want to share before we finish.
I have a monthly-ish newsletter called Fuel Your Curiosity, and you can sign up for it right on the Curiosity Tank website. Also in the show notes, there's a direct link. And I also invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to write there at least once a week. And it's usually about user research or observations I have about people which relate to user research or listening skills, or sometimes I write about these kindergarten assignments as well. So I'm pleased to meet you, and thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Awesome. It was my pleasure. And if anyone else wants to chat, have a UXR conversation, I'm on the Twitter at noamseg, or my email is noamseg@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, for being with us, and see you next time, which will be very soon. Announcements coming. But for now, have a good evening and stay healthy and safe. Bye for now.